Russia has hit Ukraine, has hit Kiev in a huge way. And the events that have transpired since have been shocking. On December 29th, Russia launched a massive missile strike campaign. Over 150 missiles, I believe. There are 158 or so counted now. Underreporting from the Western mainstream media, of course, going on, but it caused massive damage to Ukraine's military and logistical sites. And of course, Russia is being blamed for the civilian casualties that have come about. And we're going to get into why I believe there is a lot of warranted suspicion about the accusations against Russia. But nonetheless, these strikes occurred and they rocked the Western mainstream media headlines that night. And there has been a response. Kiev has attacked and committed atrocities in the Russian border city of Volgograd. There are at least 29 people, I believe, and we'll get into that story later, killed, including children. And now these escalations have reached a fever pitch to end 2023. But here is how the Western mainstream media reported this story. This is from the Associated Press. It said Russia launches biggest aerial barrage of the war and kills 30 civilians, says Ukraine. Russia launched 122 missiles. I believe that's an undercount because there are also dozens of drones, as they say, against Ukrainian targets, officials said on Friday, killing at least 30 civilians across the country in what an Air Force official called the biggest aerial barrage of the war. At least 144 people were wounded and an unknown number were buried under rubble, roughly during the 18-hour onslaught. A maternal hospital, apartment blocks, and schools were among the buildings reported having damage in Ukraine. In the capital of Kiev, broken glass and mangled metal littered city streets. Air-rated emergency service sirens wailed as plumes of smoke drifted into the light blue sky. Katerina Ivanivna, a 72-year-old Kiev resident, said she threw herself to the ground when the missile struck. There was an explosion, then flames. I covered my head, got down into the street, then I ran to the subway. In Poland, they're saying that what was apparently a Russian missile, this is what's important, had entered the country's airspace Friday morning from the direction of Ukraine and vanished off radars. In the attack on Ukraine, the Air Force intercepted most of the ballistic and cruise missiles and the Shahed-type drones overnight, said Valery Zaluzhny, Ukraine's military chief. Although Russia say none of them were intercepted, they all hit their targets. So, of course, there is a discrepancy there. And we all know Kiev has a propensity for lying through their teeth. So this is known as the largest attack yet in the entire conflict. This is one that was considered to be in a stalemate. But a stalemate looks very different from a full frontal massive missile barrage. So I want to now put on what Russia had to say. So this is from RT, and this is Russia confirming the massive barrage on targets in Ukraine. They said that an overnight operation added to 50 group strikes conducted throughout the week occurred, said the defense ministry. Russia's defense ministry has confirmed its forces launched a series of attacks against multiple targets in Ukraine in the last week. A statement from the ministry on Friday detailed 50 group strikes in a single massive barrage using precision missiles and drones. The ministry described the intended targets as defense industry sites, military airfield infrastructure, and depots for storage or artillery, munitions, naval drones, arms, and fuel for military vehicles, as well as troops' positions. All of them were successfully hit, the statement added. So that's a different story than what we're hearing in the Western mainstream media. Valery Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, reported earlier that day that at least 158 separate launches were detected by Kiev's troops on Thursday evening. He claimed that of the total, 27 drones and 87 cruise missiles were intercepted. So according to Russia, all of them hit. According to Ukraine, they were able to intercept some. Okay, so now I want to get into how the United States reacted, because this is a story that developed quite rapidly. The United States reacted in a huge way, and then Kiev called on the United Nations to convene. And of course, its Western backers helped this along, convened a meeting at the UN Security Council. So here is what Joe Biden had to say. His administration released a statement on the aerial assault of December 29th. On that night, he said Russia launched its largest aerial assault on Ukraine since the war began. This massive bombardment used drones and missiles, including missiles with hypersonic capabilities, to strike cities and civilian infrastructure all across Ukraine. Note that Russia says it did not target civilian infrastructure. And this is important and we'll get to why. Strikes reportedly hit a maternity hospital, a shopping mall, and residential areas, killing innocent people and injuring dozens more. It's a stark reminder to the world that nearly after 2 years of this devastating war, Putin's objectives remain unchanged. He seeks to obliterate Ukraine and subjugate its people. He must be stopped. And then there's bragging about these air defense systems, which obviously didn't do too well. But of course, the United States takes full credit, as well as NATO. Its NATO partners take full credit for arming Ukraine in this way and urging Congress to take action. So no big surprises there, but Putin must be stopped, they said. Putin must be stopped. Well, here is what Russia had to say about this air defense question. And a lot of people would call you a Putin puppet or an agent of Russia for maybe agreeing with this position, but it's hard to disagree. And I'm going to show you why in a second. But according to Russia, when they were called to the United Nations by the backers of Kiev after this assault, Russia claimed that Ukraine is positioning its air defenses in residential areas. Sound familiar? Oftentimes, Hamas in Gaza is claimed to be using human shields. Well, essentially, what Russia has been arguing this entire time is that that's what Kiev has been doing. It's been positioning its air defenses in residential areas, and that's leading to civilian casualties when they malfunction. This is what permanent representative of the UN from Russia, Vasily Nebenzia, told the Security Council on Friday. Officials in Kiev have accused Moscow of killing 30 civilians and injuring at least 160 more in the 18-hour barrage of drones and missiles across the country earlier that day. There's only one solution. Russia must be deprived of its ability to produce weapons to finance its military aggression and to threaten the world. That's what Ukrainian envoy Sergei Kislitsa said. He went on to accuse Russia of rocket terrorism against civilians. Kislitsa was backed by the British representative who said that the death toll would have been greater if not for the work of its air defenses, Ukraine's air defenses. It's difficult to imagine greater cynicism. If not for the work of Ukrainian air defense, there would have been no civilian casualties. The Russian envoy said there are numerous videos available online showing how Russian missiles and drones are striking military sites and depots, causing distinctive detonation, while Ukrainian anti-air raid missiles are missing their targets and veering off course and falling on residential buildings and other civilian sites. He argued that fragments of projectiles are causing damage in civilian areas only because Ukrainian air defense systems are posted there. During the meeting, which was broadcast live, Nebenzia held up a sheet of paper with a QR code linking to a video he said was proof of his claims. According to the transcript from the website of Russia's mission to the UN, the link leads to a video showing a burning projectile crashing into a high-rise building. I'm not going to play the video here for the censors, but essentially what you will see in that video is a residential building catching on fire, exploding from the top, and that's because a projectile hit, and it's quite likely, if not 100%, the truth that that was a Ukrainian air defense system malfunctioning, misfiring, however you want to put it. So that's what Russia accuses Ukraine of. And I think it's important to take stock of Russia's position because while many might say in the collective West, especially the neocons, will say, how could you believe what Russia is saying? Of course they're going to say this. Of course they're going to use this argument because it justifies their aggression on Ukraine. Well, the facts say a completely different story. Back in September, the New York Times, this isn't RT, this isn't any kind of Russian media source. This is, first of all, it's being reported by the Business Insider because the New York Times article is very detailed, very long. This summarizes it very well, though. Business Insider said a missile strike back in September 2023 killed at least 15 people in a Ukrainian market, and it was blamed on Russia. There's growing evidence it was fired by Ukraine. A missile that hit Kostanaya Nivka in September was Ukrainian, a New York Times analysis said. Kiev had blamed the attack, which killed at least 15 people, on Russia. Data analyzed by the New York Times suggests it was an air defense missile that went off course. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? I think it does. A missile that struck a busy market in East Ukraine was likely misfired by Ukraine and not the result of a Russian attack, said the New York Times analysis. The missile struck the town, which is close to where Russian and Ukrainian forces are battling in Bakhmut. So this was back in September during the Battle of Bakhmut, killing at least 15 and injuring around 30 people. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky blamed the attack on Russia, and the UN and Ukraine's Western allies condemned the strike. The Russian evil must be defeated, said Zelensky. He described the missile strike as a deliberate attack on a peaceful city. But a new analysis of missile fragments, satellite imagery, witness accounts, and social media posts suggests the incident was likely caused by a misfired air defense missile, said the New York Times. Analysts told the Times that problems with the missile's guidance systems or a fault with its tail fin can cause it to go accidentally off course. Russia has deliberately attacked civilian targets multiple times during the war, blah, 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 said Human Rights Watch. But back to the Times analysis, there are several pieces of evidence that this strike was a tragic Ukrainian error, they're saying. Tragic error, right? Whenever Ukraine kills civilians, it's an error. Whenever Russia is accused of killing civilians, it is evil. So the video footage and data from the impact site indicate it came from a territory to the northwest of the city controlled by Ukraine. 2 times reporters were in the village of Dzhurkivka, 10 miles northwest of this city, and said that shortly after 2 p.m. on September 6th, Ukraine launched 2 surface-to-air missiles. Several eyewitnesses backed the claim. A missile struck Kosyanivka at 2:04 p.m. Analysis of shrapnel damage at the impact site is consistent with the missile being a 9M38 launched by a Buk surface-to-air launch system of the kind used by Ukraine and Russia. It is not consistent with Kiev's claim it was caused by an S-300 missile. So essentially, this has happened before. This has happened before. So all in all, Ukraine is being lauded, of course, as the victim. And they went to the UN Security Council with the help of their representatives there within NATO, the United States, the UK, France, etc., to try to make their case. Okay. But at the UN Security Council, I just want to read what the UN envoy, Vasily Nebenzia, had to say further. Okay. So he said that Ukraine does not and will not have the resources to achieve a breakthrough or preserve the current situation on the line of contact between the armies. The military plans of the regime in Kiev have ended in a complete fiasco. That is why you should anticipate bad news in the nearest future for yourself and your Ukrainian proxies. He was telling this directly to the collective West. The Russian envoy stated that additional military aid is only going to prolong the agony. A military victory over Russia is completely unattainable. It's an unattainable goal. Time is running out for the regime in Kiev. Its future is, in fact, under serious threat. At the same time, peaceful Ukrainians, the Ukrainian language, and Ukrainian culture are under no threat, no matter how hard the West is trying to prove the opposite. So Russia had very strong words for the United States, for the NATO backers of Kiev after this attack. And now this attack, of course, was met with retaliation. And while we know that the accusations against Russia here are incredibly suspect, because we know that Ukraine has blamed these attacks on Russia before. We know that Russia has actually been quite precise in demilitarizing not just Ukraine, but the entire collective West, and keeping civilian casualties at such a low point that Israel has already surpassed by many, many times over the civilian casualty numbers in Gaza that exist in Ukraine. The number of children, we're talking about 10, 15, 20 times more killed in Gaza than in Ukraine. Why? Because Russia has been incredibly measured, incredibly careful. It has done everything it can to keep this war from affecting ordinary people. But of course, Kiev has done the exact opposite, because since the beginning, This has been a war against the Russian people in what was once Eastern Ukraine and now Russia. So here we have, okay, the attack, this is from the Moscow Times, but it was really from the AFP, this report. On Saturday, the following day, this is, as this is being recorded, December 30th, Kiev launched an atrocious campaign, committed massive atrocities in Volgograd, a border city to Ukraine in Russia. So Russia has accused Ukraine of carrying out a terrorist attack on civilians in the city of Volgograd, including using controversial cluster munitions in the strikes that killed at least 21 and wounded dozens more. Moscow said the attack, which followed waves of rocket and drone attacks by Russian forces in Ukrainian cities, would not go unpunished. In an emergency meeting at the UN Security Council demanded by Russian envoy Vasily Nebenzia, claimed that Kiev targeted a sports center, an ice rink, and a university. In order to increase the number of casualties of the terrorist attack, they used cluster munitions. It was a deliberate, indiscriminate attack against civilian targets. Both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine were due to give New Year's speeches on Sunday as the conflict approaches the second anniversary this coming February. The Volgograd attack came a day after the Ukraine set a barrage of missile strikes on several cities, killed at least 39 people, wounding dozens more. So Volgograd lies about 30 kilometers, 19 miles from the border of Ukraine, has been repeatedly struck by what Moscow says is indiscriminate shelling by Kiev's forces. And Russia said it's not going to go unpunished. So another crime, essentially. Another crime. And this has been happening repeatedly, over and over and over again. Volgograd, these Russian border areas to Ukraine, have been attacked with U.S. and NATO weaponry and logistical support, right? People who are providing, we're talking about advisors. These advisors from the United States and NATO, Russia has accused over and over again of being directly involved in killing Russians, which has been a primary aim of this conflict from the very start. And it's just an absolute atrocity, right? Because according to Russia, children were killed in the attack on Volgograd, that at least 2 children were among the 14 people killed, and there were over 100 injured, said the emergency ministry of Russia. The barrage was first reported by regional governor Vyacheslav Gladkov, who said, citing preliminary data, that at least 2 casualties were children. On Telegram, the official said that the barrage hit the city center, located about 40 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, although he did not provide details on what weapons had been used. He added that the attack had hit a residential sector. Later, however, as the death toll continued to mount, the emergency ministry said that the Ukrainian attack had claimed the lives of 12 adults and 2 children. He noted that 108 people were injured, including 15 minors. So, children, that's who they're targeting. This is targeting. Even if Russia had struck Kiev and those other neighboring cities and areas and had killed civilians, no one could say that they were targeting the civilians, because Ukraine, as Russia has said and has been proven, they are literally stationing their air defense systems in residential areas, meaning that they are using Ukrainian people and Ukrainian infrastructure as human shields against Russia. And Russia has said, we're going to demilitarize Ukraine by any means necessary, which means it is on Ukraine to protect and prevent civilian casualties. Now, the fact of the matter is that Ukraine has done the exact opposite of that. Ukraine has killed their own people. That's what they did. And I am willing to bet, and there needs to be an investigation, because I can't put any evidence or facts behind this just yet, because this is such a new development. But if it's anything like what had happened in September with that groundbreaking New York Times analysis, who's to say that in another 3, 6, 9 months, we're not going to have another analysis saying, oops, it wasn't Russia at all. It is very likely that that is the case, that it was not Russia at all, that it was Ukraine's misfiring, their inability. What happens when you give untrained, unprepared, ill-prepared, unmotivated, and completely bankrupt forces this kind of weaponry and they don't know how to use it, well, they make mistakes. What happens when you give them that weaponry and you tell them, fire in the middle of residential areas? It might hit those residential areas. And I believe that's what happened here. So this is an absolute atrocity, what happened in Belgorod and what happened in Kiev and the other areas of West Ukraine. What we are seeing is absolute desperation from Ukraine's side, but really the entirety of its backers, the entirety of the Ukraine project, led, of course, by the United States. This is desperation. This is an attempt to create a crisis in order to push forward the conflict. But what Russia is doing, and I believe this wholeheartedly, Russia is laying the groundwork for showing Ukraine and showing NATO and showing the United States that this is what happens when you F around. You find out. And this war of attrition is about to get a lot more intense. Russia, there are rumors that there's going to be a winter offensive, that this is really just the first strike coming out of Russia's deep and heavy arsenal, prepared and ready to finish the job, to end this conflict on Russia's terms. That's what the initial attack that happened on Friday, December 29th was all about. And that is what Kiev is basically asking for to accelerate with their heinous attack on Belgorod. And this is only going to get worse and worse for Ukraine, because Ukraine is having a terrible end of 2023. Everything has shifted in this conflict. At the beginning of 2023, Ukraine was supposedly in the driver's seat. Mid-2022, late 2022, it was said to have captured all this territory. It was said to have been able to take control in Kharkov, in areas near it, and that its so-called offensive in the summer of 2022 was so successful that it was ready for another counteroffensive coming up in 2023 to essentially finish the job. And from the very beginning of 2023, it's been a process of rolling back that complete fallacy, rolling it back, dialing back the volume. The United States, NATO, Vilnius, we saw it in July of 2023. We saw when the counteroffensive started in June of 2023 that immediately the United States and NATO said, oh, wait, this is not going to go how we thought it was going to go. And why? Because it was Ukraine's third army, and it was not even close to being as equipped as it was during the February 2022 initial phase of the special military operation, or even during that so-called summer offensive of 2022. So this has been a terrible year. The counteroffensive was a massive failure. And now the entirety of the collective West is really looking for an exit ramp. And that's why, in response to this attack that Russia has ushered in and imposed upon Ukraine, Ukraine had to answer in a desperate and most vile and utterly disgusting way. They had to respond in a manner that's not going to help them one bit on the battlefield, but actually will probably accelerate its demise. So the end of Ukraine is near. These attacks, these atrocities, these intentional assaults on the Russian people will not be tolerated. And it's only a matter of time before Russia begins to accelerate this process of demilitarization of Ukraine and really end this conflict on its own terms. That's where we're headed. That's what winter 2024 is going to bring. And really, Ukraine is doomed. And the strikes on Kiev and surrounding areas of December 29th really made that point quite clear. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help.
I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.